do an investigation of alleged use. If someone claims that chemical weapons have been used, we can send an inspection team to check that claim, to see whether it's true or not. Then I said the third area that we really kind of focus on is science. There was lots of you, I don't know how many people are actually studying chemistry, for example, here in the room, but science isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. Science can be put to many different uses, to multiple uses. That's the same with chemicals as well. The picture here is of a German chemist called Fritz Haber. Now, he was the person who oversaw the German chemical weapons program in the First World War when chemical weapons were first used in 1915. But he also won the Nobel Prize for chemistry for a process here, the formula for sarin, for one of the chemical weapons, the nerve gas that was used in Syria. So, we know that science can be misused. Like I say, we aren't about controlling science or preventing science. We're very much about promoting cooperation between countries, cooperation between scientists, working on science diplomacy, for example. And then science also helps us. Science sometimes presents us with challenges in the OPCW, that we have to respond to new developments in science. Perhaps it makes it easier to produce particular chemicals. But then science helps us as well, because it can result in improved protection measures, for example, or improved detection measures. You can see here some of the kit that our inspectors take when they go in the field. Lots of those things there rely on science, they rely on technology to detect chemicals or to protect our inspectors against chemicals that they might be exposed to. And again, you can see, hopefully lots of you have already, that we have a kind of display outside this room. There's two people from our equipment store, which is based just outside of The Hague here. And they have a whole range of this kind of stuff there, so you can go up and you can speak to them about the equipment, you can pick stuff up, you can try on the kind of the bulletproof vests, the masks and things like that as well, so you can see what it is that our inspectors actually do, what they have to wear and how they work when in the field. But one good thing to bear in mind is diplomacy is often about what you're doing here. It's about people. It's about individuals interacting with each other. That presents challenges sometimes, but it can also be very enriching. And again, I talk kind of sometimes in the abstract about the OPCW or the Chemical Weapons Convention, but at the end of the day, it's really about people. And you have here just a few examples of people that work next door in the OPCW. So, that individual aspect to all of this is also very, very important. Like I said, I was going to be brief, but I'm perfectly willing to answer any questions you may have. I don't know how the chair wants to organise, if you want my colleague to speak next, or...
anything you want. Do you want your colleague to speak first and then questions?
Yeah, it's probably we can take questions together. Scott, do you want?
Good morning. My name is Scott Cairns. I'm an inspection team leader for the OPCW. And I'm very happy to be here. First of all, because it gives me a break from going to Syria. I just got back from Syria a few days ago. And it's also very nice when Diamond descends upon the city of The Hague. You bring a little bit more energy to this little part of the city when you're around. Not to mention filling up all the trams in the morning, making it a little harder to get to work. So I can rationalize coming to work a little bit later during the day. So thank you very much. I think what Daniel said towards the end of his presentation about the human element of disarmament or diplomacy in a larger sense is something that I'm acutely aware of and something that I'm quite protective of. I was picked, I guess, for lack of a better word, to lead the OPCW in the investigation mission in August in Syria. Does anyone remember what happened on the 21st of August, 2013? You, sir. There was a chemical attack in the East Ghouta part, which is the southern of Damascus, and also in the western neighborhood, which is currently under siege. And we just happened to be in the country. In fact, we were only a few kilometers away from where that happened. So I guess the life of an inspector changed significantly at that time. previously we were doing a lot of, pretty much what you've been doing, very routine work, a lot of paperwork, a lot of discussions, spending a lot of time at very well-established destruction facilities and other areas around the world, doing our very routine, very standardized verification activities. And then everything sort of changed. And we got the call from Ban Ki-moon to support a mission to go into Syria to investigate the alleged use of chemical weapons, which seemed to have been happening more and more in that country without too much outrage from the rest of the world. It became very important to put people there to determine what actually happened. So the OPCW is the sort of, I guess, experts in chemical warfare in the world were asked to be the main effort in supporting that activity. So we were there chatting with the government, trying to get to these sites which exist both in held territory and in government held territory. Not getting a lot of traction. I can use an OPCW word or a UN word. A lot of discussions, a lot of meetings, just bogging down in the details of what can and cannot be done. Now that's very important. You need your modalities to do anything. But the OPCW tends to be more a good mixture of diplomacy and action, because it's just what we do. So it was quite frustrating in some points that we were stuck in meetings when, in fact, just a few kilometers away, there were people that had been allegedly attacked by chemical weapons. Finally, we got in on the 26th of August, only 5 days after the attack, and that was pretty much unprecedented in any way. The other unprecedented things, I guess, for the inspector was you had to put your body armor on. You had to negotiate with, I think, at that time there were over 2,000 distinct rebel groups in Syria. So you had to hopefully pick the right ones to negotiate to get into their territory to investigate the alleged attacks. So again, you're looking at a different level of diplomacy and negotiations, very much on the ground level, and to ultimately get people across a battle line into an area where I think the day before we left to cross in there, we were given a very detailed description of how some rebel groups wanted to film our deaths on camera and send our severed heads back to our parents. So it became much less routine. I had to ask my colleagues and my friends to trust me and follow me into this area to do the job, a very specific job that we had to do, despite all these threats and despite the fact that the country is at war. So what Daniel said about the human element, the decisions that were made in New York and in The Hague, in the Security Council and the General Assembly to get a very small group of people into that country to do a very specific job, goes from very abstract and theoretical down to extremely real. And I had the fortune of seeing, I guess, both sides of it. And I much prefer the real side of it. I much prefer to be doing a job which some people admit is very dangerous, but actually has some concrete, I guess, results from it. Not to say that the work that goes on in the UN isn't of value. Sometimes it's lost in that abstract, theoretical mindset. So sometimes it's a good reminder to know that some of your decisions that you make or some of the policies that you put in place actually affect real human beings, where they will try to implement what you're trying to achieve, so that there has to be a thread of reality running through the whole thing. Ultimately, that worked out very well for us. We achieved something that hadn't been achieved ever by a very small group of people in a very small organization that up until I think last year nobody heard about. And it was because of all sides worked together to make that happen. And ultimately, it led us to Syria in October, just a few months later, to start scouring the country, which is still at war. finding all their chemical weapon production sites and all their munitions and bombs and warheads and destroying it all virtually within a month. And again, there's no greater feeling from a disarmament point of view than being able to kick over a warhead and have it destroyed in front of your eyes. It's sort of a culmination of all the things that people want to happen, and you see it happen right in front of you. So that's very valuable, I think, to keep in mind. So the life of an inspector has changed quite significantly. We've become much more, I would say, operational in the field, wearing body armor and running around in armored vehicles and getting things done, which is, I think, to our great satisfaction that happens. But also it's coupled with a lot of boredom, sitting around doing routine paperwork, being very meticulous in our accounting, being very pedantic in our accounting. But those things are also very important. They may not be glamorous, they may not be quite sexy, but the things that have to be done to ensure that everything we do is completely dependable in every court, whether it's a court of public opinion or ultimately from the investigation, it may be something that goes to a court of law. So it's been, I think, for myself and I think for most of the technical secretaries, it's been a great satisfaction to be working in Syria despite the dangers, because truly we're seeing the results of what we're doing. We're helping people, regardless of their ideology, regardless of what side they're on, regardless of anything. Getting these weapons out of the country, destroying the capacity to wage chemical warfare is something I think which is fundamental to our existence and fundamental to a human understanding. So it's been very good that way. So that's the life of an inspector. It's probably not much different from yours, except that I get to run around in a cool helmet and body armor occasionally. Have you any questions? No questions?
If you do have a question, just please line up at the microphone and please ask Mr.
And Daniel.
Why is there so much more focus placed on the control of, say, chemical and biological weapons than there is on equally lethal or more conventional weapons?
That's an excellent question. Daniel.
See how this is going to work. One thing is you've got, with regards to chemical and biological weapons, for example, you have a kind of very ancient, very kind of even cross-cultural kind of taboo against these weapons. This is one thing that came up, because that question was asked quite frequently after the attacking officers got referred to. Why is it only now that the international community kind of cares about something happening in Syria? 100,000 people have been killed by conventional weapons. But I think, through human history, there's been this kind of profound kind of fear of chemical and biological weapons. They weren't always called by those names about poison in the kind of the old days. It's always been seen as a kind of as an underhand way of fighting. It's always been seen in the days of kind of chivalry. It was the unchivalrous way of fighting, to kill your opponent by poison. It's not kind of gentlemanly way to fight. So it's always been seen as kind of slightly underhand. And over kind of centuries, really, there's become this kind of taboo against using these weapons. And that has become, in recent years, the last century, has been kind of voted by into international law by that chemical weapons, like biological weapons, as mentioned, the Geneva Protocol before that in 1925. So, I think it's partly almost a kind of psychological thing in some ways, that people really fear the unseen. You can't see these things, you can't smell them, you don't know whether they're going to be attacked by something. I think that's quite kind of rooted in our psyche in some ways. So I think that's one of the reasons why these weapons have been kind of singled out, along with nuclear weapons as well, which are really another category completely. They have been singled out as weapons of mass destruction, because their effects are so massive compared with others. That partly answers your question, at least.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. Also, I think it's important to remember that disarmament is evolving. You have the Ottawa Treaty, which bans a class of conventional weapon. They're trying to get traction on the banning of cluster emissions. So these things may happen slowly, but I think, as Daniel correctly points out, it's a very visceral objection to some of these weapons. And I think that gave the impetus to providing much more formalized treaties on what I have full confidence that eventually, it may take many years, that we will start to ban certain types of conventional weapons. Thank you.
Apart from your experiences with the rebels in Syria, how was your experience with the general population? How did they react to you being there, to you working there? How was your experience with that?
It's a mixed bag. I'm slowly learning Arabic, so I know when I'm being sweared at. Overall, I absolutely love the Syrian people. They're very warm and welcoming and open society within the constraints of the regime that they're under. Some people just don't want us there. Some people associate us with the United Nations, which we're currently in a joint mission with. So some of those connotations work against us. Some of them work very much for us. And it's been significant in the way that we left a legacy of our interaction with the general population in August when we visited some of these areas that were completely under siege by the government and provided them with assistance. There was one location called Wadaniya, which they haven't seen a UN base in 6 months, and then we rolled up to help them. So that leaves quite a lasting and resonating effect. In Damascus, in Homs, in Latakia, again, it's a mixed bag between some really like us there and some of us would be very happy for us to leave.
This is a personal question, but how has this experience affected your view on humanity and human nature?
It's a mixed bag, again. It's seeing some of the devastation, and both on a personal level and also on a sort of societal level. Seeing neighborhoods completely destroyed, seeing babies affected by nerve agent, seeing children whose entire families have been wiped out, and having to interview them about what happened. And driving through neighborhoods and seeing just the absolute destruction and tragedy that's going on there. Again, regardless of ideology and regardless of side, it's profoundly affecting me.
Hi. So obviously some of the chemical weapons have left Syria for destruction already. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of the destruction at this point, the rest of the chemicals and agents and such?
The most challenging part of the destruction?
From now.
From now? Well, we've only moved a very, very small percentage of chemicals out of the country. We're still pressing the government and other stakeholders to work together to ensure the smooth passage of these materials from the sites to the coast and onto the ships. That is the most challenging, to get everybody to work together harmoniously, to put down their petty differences, to put down their national or personal interests in this activity, and to remember the core function of our presence in Syria is to move these chemicals out. Just to keep reminding people to do that and not have this effort hijacked by other agendas is the most challenging. On top of the fact that the country is at war.
Can I just add one thing to that as well, is that everything Scott says is entirely true. And then we have, what's happening now is really a very good example of international cooperation. Because as Scott said, this is an operation that doesn't just involve us in the OPCW, it involves various parts of the UN. We're working very closely together in this mission. But then, removing the chemical weapons and taking them somewhere else is a huge logistical operation. We have cargo ships from Denmark and Norway, naval escorts from China, from Russia, Denmark and Norway as well, from the UK. We have a US ship which is on its way with destruction facilities built into it. The Italians have offered a port to kind of transload these chemicals from one ship to another. So it's a massive, brilliant example of countries working together towards the goal that Scott mentioned of getting these chemicals out of the country. So it's a really good example of international cooperation, very practical, and also very ambitious in terms of how quickly it needs to be done.
It's important to keep your sense of humor.
This is already partly answered, but have you met any of the victims from the Syrian chemical weapons attack, and what was that experience like?
Yes, I met dozens and dozens and dozens of victims. And yeah, it's changed me for the rest of my life.
Well, I've read that both sides in Syria, government and the opposers, make claims of chemical weapons. Is it true? And if yes, why are the opposers using them?
You're going to hear some very good UN speak right now. Our mandate under the UN Secretary General's mechanism, which I'm sure you've all read, the mandate that Ban Ki-moon provided us with was not to assign attribution to the use of chemical weapons. Now, some people say that was a gap in the mandate, because you go all the way there, you determine that sarin had been used, but you don't say who used it. And other people say it's, well, that's quite wise, because first of all, you have to operate in that country. And if they join the Chemical Weapons Convention, you still have to get everything out of the country. Accusing people of doing things within that forum won't be very helpful for those future activities. So unfortunately, I can't answer the question for you that who did it. Thank you.
To what extent do you think that your experiences in the mission in Syria have changed how you view your day-to-day life and work?
I'm still reintegrating into Dutch society after coming back from Syria. I think anybody who's traveled to any country, there is a period of adjustment. But when you go into a country that's at war, you have a number of significant changes to how you work and how you operate. And it does take time to decompress from that. I think it was asked before how I view humanity. I'm still all for humanity. I think the good in people far outweighs the cruelty and evil that sometimes we impose upon ourselves. And I see far more people interested in affecting this war in Syria in a positive way. And I see people that want to do it in a negative way. So, if anything, it's reinforced my faith, perhaps not directly in the United Nations, but directly in humanity, that we ultimately don't want war. We ultimately are horrified at these activities, and I think it will be affected to the best.
I'd like to know how did your inspection team keep the morality high during the mission? And also, most importantly, what motivated you to continue your job in Syria, which from my point must be a job that not everyone would be able to continue after months?
I ask myself that question quite a bit. How many people would like to come to Syria and do investigation activities or inspection stuff? Put your hands up. See? There's a lot of interest, and that interest is in yourself for your own personal reasons, and I think for a lot of humanistic reasons. Plus, you probably want to get out there and affect something in life for once, that you can really see the results. I've fallen in love with Syria. It's a beautiful place. The whole Middle East is a fantastic place. My colleagues and I have gotten much closer together. We have many parties for morale purposes. And I think just the level of trust in your colleagues when you actually have to do some of these very difficult tasks in very difficult conditions just brings you closer together. I'm sure you've heard of soldiers that have said that they're truly only doing it for their people next to them, or that they're really doing it for the camaraderie. And that becomes true to an extent. I don't know. I just like what I do. I think I'm pretty good at it. I really enjoy working at the OPCW, and this is really our turn to affect something significant. And I want to be part of that. Not for glory. There's no glory to be found in Syria. There's no fame. There are no awards. There's nothing there. It's for your own personal satisfaction as a human being to be able to say, yes, I help people. Yes, I have made a difference in the world, which I think is probably why a lot of you are here. So the same reasons as you. Thank you.
Before the next question comes, we would like to say that the line for questions should stop because Mr. Cairns and Mr. Feakes can only answer so many questions. So that line is the final line. Sorry. Go ahead.
For becoming, especially at chemical weapons investigation, but also working at the OPCW, what do you become regarding these different aspects you work on? A scientist or diplomat or more of a soldier? What do you study? What do you
All three is a really good combination. I think personally, when I became the head of the investigation mission back in March, and I was thrown into the deep end of diplomacy very quickly. And I would have loved it and hated it, but I got a very quick and brutal education in high-level diplomacy, and I think that benefited me. Being a scientist is also very good because then people think you know what you're talking about, which is very useful. But also having a little bit more of an operational background, perhaps not just a soldier, but somebody that's very action-oriented, is also extremely useful to understand both the hardships and what is necessary to do in the field. So most of our work is field work. Now, I would say that's from the inspector point of view. I think from the other aspects of the technical secretariat, you probably see much more diplomacy and much more negotiation skills.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to do, we're an international organisation, fairly small, maybe 500 people. But even within that, you need the whole range. You obviously need the science side, you need the operational side, but you obviously need the diplomacy. But you also need people that work IT systems. You need accountants and finance people. You need lawyers, very important for our lawyers. So you need the whole range of things. So if anyone's thinking in terms of future careers, obviously what you're doing now is great experience for the diplomacy side of things, and studying something like international relations. It's great experience. I did that myself, but it's not essential. You can come into this from various different angles, and the same for many other international organisations. Particularly for what we're doing, the science is kind of key. But I didn't do science. I gave up chemistry when I was 14 or 15, for example. So it's not essential. But it's good. We need everything. That's what makes it so interesting, because you work with so many different types of people, not just different nationalities. But, you work with former military people, former scientists, former diplomats. So, it's that mix. Again, going back to the kind of human element, it's that mix of people, different characters and stuff that makes it so interesting.
I just want to go on the record. Chemistry is extremely cruel.
Pretty bad.
Don't listen to Dan.
I never said it wasn't cool.
Okay, so we've all heard about the various dangers in Syria. The civil war, the whole situation is really deplorable. But was there any particular point during your time in Syria that stood out above all as being the one time you felt that you really were in danger?
Yeah, there were several times. Once on the 26th, when we were trying to enter the encircled neighborhood of Wanamia, and our cars got shot up to the point where one of them was disabled. Couldn't use it anymore. And then big AK-47 round splash marks on the windshield and the body of the vehicle. So someone shooting directly at me was one time when I felt I was in danger. Some of the other times, just the threats that were coming in. I think we were getting constant threats, whether it was to us personally or whether it was into the mission. Some people really didn't want us there. Sometimes we were mortared a little bit too closely. There were many times that we felt to be in danger, but we just don't go in there blindly. We do a lot of, let's say, safety and security assessments before we do anything. We have some very, very good UN people from the Department of Safety and Security, which take care of us. So we accept the risk, we understand the dangers, and then we decide whether we want to do it or not. And so far, I have to say we've been very lucky.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to ask some technical question. I know that the OPCW has been dedicated to the destruction of chemical weapons as well as the facilities in irreversible manners. However, I think that once the technology is gained, it's really hard for us to make sure that such weapons cannot be produced again. And when some powers come into really dangerous situations, they may just do whatever they can to protect their powers. So what are your strategies with this?
I'll let Daniel speak about that, but just to be very clear that this is a voluntary treaty. People join the convention, and we work in a very cooperative manner. They declare to us what they have. And when you join the convention, when you join the OPCW, you just don't get inspected once. You get inspected throughout the lifetime of your membership in the treaty. So we will constantly be going back to these sites to ensure that there's been no diversion of technology or chemicals, if there are any chemicals still existing, and to ensure that there is no reemergence of the program in the country. And we do that for all member states that have declared programs. The rest,
I'm glad you asked the question, because this now gives me a chance to kind of say what I wanted to say about chemistry and how I might not have studied it when I was 14, 15 or something, but now a lot of what I'm particularly doing at work at the moment is in terms of getting people who are studying chemistry interested in what we do in the OPCW and making that seem relevant. But to kind of specifically go to your question first, I said in my presentation, disarmament really has two sides. There's one side which is getting rid of the weapons that already exist. So the kind of legacy stockpiles in some ways from the Cold War days, for example. So that's one side, and that's what we're doing, and that's where we've got 82% of the weapons destroyed. And like I said, the other side is to make sure they don't come back, like you said, that they don't kind of re-emerge again in the future, either through states having programs or non-state actors, terrorists, individuals, for example. So that's the other side, and that's what we're beginning to focus more of our attention in the OPCW on now, because we are reaching the kind of 82+ mark in terms of destroying the legacy weapons. So, it comes down to things like non-proliferation. So it's checking chemical industry. As Scott said, it's all a very voluntary process, but it's a continuous process. We have declarations from states every year. We check them every year. It's checking transfers between, countries, chemical, legitimate transfers as part of the chemical industry. It's working with them to build up their domestic regulations, their laws, their first response capabilities, their customs authorities, for example. There's a whole range of things that we do which builds up the capacity of countries to kind of protect against chemical weapons re-emerging. But from my point of view, one of the really important things is to get it into people's heads, at a kind of early stage of their training, whether it's in chemistry, chemical engineering, or in other things that are related to that in terms of being a future policymaker or diplomat or lawyer, is chemistry is a good thing. Science in general is good. It's good for development